Imagine walking through a German factory in 1944. The sound of massive machines fills the air. Steel presses hammer down. Engines are being assembled. Thousands of workers move through the production lines, building the weapons that are keeping the Nazi war machine alive. Everything looks normal, until someone notices a baseball, a simple baseball, sitting where it shouldn't be, maybe near a machine, maybe on a pile of materials, maybe carried by a worker who looks completely harmless. A factory guard sees it and ignores it. Because why wouldn't he? It's just a ball, a child's toy, something from the world of games. Not war, not sabotage, not destruction. But moments later, the impossible happens. A violent explosion tears through the factory floor. Machines worth millions are destroyed. Production stops. Workers panic. Security rushes in, and the question spreads through the factory. How did this happen? The answer sounds unbelievable. The weapon was hiding in plain sight. The Allies had turned America's favorite pastime into a tool of destruction. A baseball designed to look completely ordinary, but hiding a deadly secret inside. This was not a joke. This was not a movie invention. This was the world of secret warfare during World War II. The story of the OSS exploding baseball. Welcome back to Allied Sabotage Vault, the channel where we uncover the forgotten weapons, secret missions, and strange inventions that changed the course of history from the shadows. We've explored exploding rats, disguised pistols, hidden detonators, secret sabotage tools, and weapons that looked like everyday objects. But this one might be the most unexpected, because the weapon wasn't hidden in a cigarette. It wasn't hidden inside a pen. It wasn't disguised as a normal piece of equipment. It was something people played with. A baseball. And the strangest part? The idea behind it was so simple that it was terrifying. So how did intelligence officers transform a normal baseball into a sabotage weapon? How did they move these devices behind enemy lines? And did German security ever realize that a harmless-looking object could become a deadly threat? The answer reveals how far the secret war really went. Because in World War II, the battlefield wasn't only made of tanks and aircraft. Sometimes, the most dangerous weapons looked like nothing at all. By 1943, the war had become a massive industrial battle. Victory wasn't only about soldiers fighting on the front lines. It depended on factories. Factories produced aircraft. Factories built engines. Factories created ammunition. Every hour of production mattered. The Allies understood something important. If they could slow down German manufacturing, they could weaken the entire war machine. But there was a problem. Bombing factories from the air was expensive, dangerous, and often inaccurate. Aircraft had to fly deep into enemy territory. Pilots risked their lives, and even after a bombing raid, factories could sometimes recover quickly. The Allies needed something different. Something quieter, something that could appear innocent. That was where the Office of Strategic Services, the OSS, entered the picture. The OSS was America's wartime intelligence organization. It was the predecessor of today's CIA. Its mission was simple: find creative ways to hurt the enemy without fighting a traditional battle. The OSS experimented with deception, hidden weapons, sabotage devices, and psychological warfare. Their engineers asked a strange question. What objects would nobody suspect? Because the perfect sabotage weapon was not the one that looked dangerous, it was the one that looked completely normal, and that idea led them to something unexpected. A baseball. At first glance, a baseball seems like the worst possible weapon. It's small, it's common, it's not intimidating. But that was exactly the point. A suspicious-looking object attracts attention. A normal-looking object disappears. The concept was based on disguise. A specially modified baseball could be altered internally while keeping the outside appearance almost unchanged. The leather cover, the stitching, the shape, the weight. Everything had to feel natural. Because the goal was not just to hide the weapon. The goal was to fool human instinct. A guard checking supplies might search for guns, explosives, metal devices, anything that looked dangerous. But a baseball? A baseball belonged to a completely different world. It belonged to childhood, sports, normal life, and that made it valuable. The enemy expected weapons. They did not expect ordinary objects. The idea behind the exploding baseball was designed for sabotage operations. Resistance groups, agents, and people working inside enemy-controlled facilities could potentially use disguised tools to damage important targets. The goal was never random destruction. The goal was disruption. A damaged machine could stop production. A destroyed component could delay shipments. A small act of sabotage could create a much bigger problem. Because factories were complicated systems, one broken piece could affect everything: a missing part, a damaged machine, a production line forced to stop, and suddenly, a weapon that cost very little could create massive consequences. That was the genius of sabotage. It didn't require an army. Sometimes it only required one person and one hidden idea. But the exploding baseball was only part of a much bigger philosophy. The OSS became fascinated with weapons that looked harmless. They explored devices disguised as everyday objects. Because ordinary objects were everywhere. A weapon stands out. A normal object blends in. And during a war where everyone expected danger, the safest disguise was sometimes something boring. The OSS experimented with things like hidden explosives and unusual delivery methods. Their designers understood a psychological truth. People are trained to fear obvious threats. They are not trained to fear the ordinary. A soldier sees a weapon. A guard sees a suspicious package. But a normal object? The brain often ignores it, and that tiny moment of hesitation could change everything. The most terrifying part was not the explosion itself. It was the uncertainty afterward. Imagine being a factory manager in occupied Europe. One day, a machine breaks. The next day, a shipment is delayed. Then another problem happens. Then another. Suddenly, you start wondering, is there a spy inside? Is someone sabotaging us? Can we trust the workers? Can we trust the supplies? Can we trust anything? That fear was part of the weapon. Sabotage wasn't only physical, it was psychological. The enemy had to waste time checking, searching, investigating, increasing security. Every extra inspection slowed production. Every delay helped the Allies. The weapon created damage, even before it was used. But here is the mystery. How successful was the exploding baseball? How many were actually used? How many factories were damaged because of them? The truth is difficult to separate from wartime secrecy. Many OSS projects were experimental. Some devices were created for possible operations. Others were tested, but never widely deployed. Intelligence agencies often developed dozens of ideas, knowing that only a few would become practical. But whether the exploding baseball became a major battlefield weapon or remained a clever secret project, the idea itself reveals something fascinating. World War II was not only fought with strength, it was fought with creativity. The Allies knew they could not always defeat the enemy by using bigger weapons. Sometimes they needed smarter ones. And that brings us to the bigger lesson. The greatest advantage in war is not always power. Sometimes it is imagination. The Germans created enormous tanks. They built advanced aircraft. They developed terrifying weapons. But the Allies also fought another kind of war, a war of ideas, a war where a simple object could become a symbol of resistance, a reminder that even the smallest invention could create a huge impact. A baseball, something designed for a game, turned into a tool of war. A perfect example of how the battlefield had expanded beyond the front lines. Because in World War II, danger could be anywhere, even in something that looked completely harmless. So the next time you see an ordinary object, remember this story, because history has shown us something strange. The most dangerous things are sometimes the things nobody thinks to fear. If you enjoyed this forgotten story from the shadows of World War II, subscribe to Allied Sabotage Vault. More secret weapons, hidden missions, and unbelievable inventions awaiting. Because the next discovery might be even stranger.